us to choose. And the beautiful thing is there's a whole stimulation around the entrepreneurial market, because all of a sudden people that have extra money are saying, hey, you know what, that's not a bad thing, and they start investing money into the emerging market, and it's a massive boost to an economy. Now, I don't care what you say. A lot of people are going to come at me in different angles. A lot of people are going to agree with me. A lot of people are going to say whatever they like to say, but nothing I have said here is in any way incorrect. Nothing. The basic truth, however you research it, however you go about picking up your information, is there, and it's sound. And if you want to close your eyes and come up with a counter argument as to why I can't, well, whatever. I can't stop people from doing that. But the truth is there. There is more power available to us now freely, and we can harness it. You don't need to keep paying these bills. You don't need to do it anymore. You just need to start to push for change where you are. I'm not even talking about the environmental impacts or the environmental benefits, of which there are numerous. I mean, obviously, massively more beneficial to the environment than any of fossil fuel anything. I mean, I don't even have to talk about that. What I am talking about is you keeping your money and the government changing its mind and basically re-stimulating the economy through an application of sense. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you on this beautiful day, and I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are. Remember, all the links are below me down here somewhere. I don't know if you can even see my hands, but I hope you have a great day. I'm going to have a great day, and thank you and goodbye. Hello and welcome to ENN, the Environmental News Network. We are sitting here in the beautiful Cape Town. It's a bit overcast today. I'm not going to do what I normally do, in which case I cover some news stories that have come out this week. We're going to shoot that later towards the end of this week, so you can look forward to that at the end of the week. What we're going to do today is we're going to have a little discussion that kind of falls hand in hand with a very similar styled release that we did about overfishing. We did this last week. We got quite a large response from that. But I found it quite interesting that down a similar line that we should start to focus on what's going on in the oceans. It seems that mostly the responses we got were positive. But I also seem to think that science being what it is, you get a lot of scientists that are focusing on various different areas or branches of science, and they don't seem to unify them. You know, science is a very focused kind of concept. You'll have one scientist that is working on whatever quantum physics or branch of quantum physics, and you've got another scientist working on something else completely, and they very rarely marry together to form a coherent picture. Since my job, or Mother Channel's job, is about bringing you news, we've had to do a lot of research into news and stories that are emerging in relation to climate change, in relation to overfishing, extreme weather, the effects of ocean acidification, and the ongoing kind of state of the environment. But what it does is it allows you to start to see a much broader picture of what is actually going on in the planet, as opposed to seeing these very narrow kind of snatches that you may or may not pick up in news that is around you. So today's kind of story is about microplastics. Now, for those of you that don't know, microplastics is contained in almost every product that you kind of use in your bathroom, from hair shampoo all the way through to toothpaste. In fact, if you use toothpaste as an example, the reason why they put microplastics in toothpaste is so that it gives it that abrasive effect that removes plaque from your teeth. It is an inert substance, it's purely plastic, and in itself it is, it's oil based obviously, but it's not necessarily problematic in and of itself. But what happens is people all around the world, they make use of substances or kind of products that contain microplastics. And of course, if you're in a shower or if you're in a bath or standing at your basin, all of those microplastics, they drain down the drain. What's supposed to happen is that they should be ultimately, hopefully, picked up down the line. But being micro, two of them can fit in kind of roughly a hair kind of follicle. They're really, really small. They're not picked up by any filtration system. So they're not picked up either by any sewage or kind of wastewater system. And generally what happens is they flush directly out into the sea. Now, in a way, this is kind of out of sight, out of mind. But there is another kind of phenomena that's happening in the ocean, where everyone has been speaking about the volume of plastics, so from drinking water bottles, some, in fact, news this week, some countries, some states in the United States completely banned, plastic water bottles, which is a good start, but in a large respect, the damage has already been done. Those water bottles, they kind of work against each other, they degrade each other with the sunlight, and they basically sink to the bottom of the ocean floor, where they are joined up with this flow of microplastics that we use in daily household products. Now, microplastics are inert, so they kind of sink to the bottom of the ocean, but because they are oil-based, they are able to attract kind of other oil-based and other chemicals around them. So what happens is microplastics act as almost like a catalyst in terms of attracting other chemicals, highly toxic chemicals in some cases, around them. And then what happens is filter feeders, they basically start to, or suction feeders, what do they call them? Gill feeders. They basically, it's not the right name, but they suck up the parts of the ocean floor, and they suck these microplastics into their bodies. Now, obviously, these microplastics are toxic both to the fish and obviously to the ocean. But there's been higher and higher and higher concentrations of microplastics. And as you know, there's a food chain that goes on in the ocean. So what happens is a smaller fish is eaten by a bigger fish, and eventually the cycle goes on until it's ultimately, eaten by commercial fish. So the commercial fish are therefore ingesting microplastics back into their own system, and that microplastic then gets delivered back onto your table. So there's a big cycle that goes through from the microplastics that are used inside of your toothpaste or your hair wash. It's a big cycle ultimately going through the food chain until it lands back in your gut. But they don't land back in your gut as an inert plastic. They land back in your gut filled with toxic chemicals. Now that is a truth cycle. That is a big problem that is going on all over the world. And that problem, you can actually take a sample of water anywhere in the world, and there will be a large proportion of microplastics in it. And so you can see how this is starting to have, first of all, effect on human health. But generally, I find a lot of people, they're prepared to throw aside the concept of impact of human health. So I'm going to add a couple of, if you consider that our main narrative, so that's our main story, I'd like you to remember a couple of things. Do you remember the Rio Games that are currently going on? They had a report that came out recently about multiple drug-resistant bacteria that was found in the water, where they were intending to go and do the sailing events. They even had one German Olympic entrant for sailing not wanting to touch the water because he felt that it was dirty, and in fact he was absolutely right, it was polluted. And it was polluted because there is a world legislation in terms of the amount of sewage that needs to be refined, processed, cleaned before it's put out into the sea. And as it turns out, it's 51%. So that means that of all the stuff that is flushed down into our drains and into the sewage system, only 51% of it actually needs to be processed before it gets shoved out into the ocean. Now, why does bacteria all of a sudden develop some kind of immunity or some kind of response in terms of its toxicity and its ability to infect people? Why does a bacteria go through a gene shift? The reason for this is because of those chemicals that are in the water. For argument's sake, I saw an advert on television yesterday. It was for a bleach, like a drain cleaner. It was Domestos. And people basically go and they squirt this drain cleaner inside of their toilets and brings this beautiful lemon fresh scent, and that basically gets flushed down the toilet. Now, Domestos is an antibacterial property. Now, much in the same as humans, if you take an antibiotic, you don't finish the course. There is a high probability that you still contain the bacteria in you. And what that bacteria does is it learns an immunity to that specific strain of antibiotic. And this is happening all the time with all the chemicals that we are basically flushing down into the oceans. And that is what brought about this change in terms of what was going on about this highly virulent form of bacteria that was found inside of, at the Rio Games. So this is extremely problematic. But add to this now, we had a report. So this is just trying to keep you on the narrative. So add that little story that I've just told you about Rio on the side stream of the narrative. And you can see how these all start to kind of marry together. If you add to it, the World Wildlife Foundation, they basically released a report in terms of the chemicals that are being flushed into the Mediterranean. Then, of course, we had that report that we issued last week about how the Mediterranean is a barren desert. Basically it's an ocean, but it's a desert. There's no more life. There's just pieces of kelp, and the kind of ocean cycle or food cycle or life cycle of that ocean has dramatically changed as a result of the chemicals that are being flushed into it. And then the World Wildlife Foundation picked up that there was actually a whole lot of unknown chemicals. These are chemicals that haven't been identified before. They've basically been married together by microplastics in the oceans. So microplastics were actually causing different bonds to join inside of different chemicals and form whole new chemicals that nobody actually has any idea what they do. No idea. But we do know that they are likely toxic. They're definitely toxic to fish. You are therefore ingesting those fish. So remember our main narrative, we had the Rio Games, we had the World Wildlife Foundation talking about the chemicals into the sea. Now we've had a discussion about the report that came out previously talking about the volume of chemicals that are in the Mediterranean. And then, of course, there are all those very popular stories about those big floating plastic islands that are basically sitting out in the ocean, slowly corroding, making more and more kind of microplastics as they degrade. But a new study has come out inside of this week that basically has proven that not only does the small larvae and kind of the smaller kind of filter feeders that live in the oceans, not only do they start to eat these microplastics, but they almost have a preference for these microplastics. And they are consuming vast quantities of this. But this is having a direct impact on their reproductive ability. The toxins are so strong in them that there's roughly a 30% reduction in the ability. So if you took a whole segment of larvae, you picked it up and you see how many could reproduce by comparison to how many can reproduce in the current ocean environment, there's been a reduction by up to 30%, and there's been a reduction of almost 50% in terms of their lifespan, which means that those toxins, those chemicals, are having a direct effect, a direct impact on the lifespan of those creatures and naturally on the health of those creatures. So obviously, if you take again a look at the whole narrative, at the impact of all of the chemicals that are flooding into the oceans, the effects that are being picked up by this scientist there in the Mediterranean, this scientist there in the States picking up the impact on larvae, there in Rio, the impact of what's going on in terms of the new bacterial strains that are found inside of the oceans, it's actually quite crazy. The problem is extremely real. So I posed it to a couple of people yesterday. I said, okay, now listen, here's the problem. I told them pretty much the same story that I've told you. And a lot of it, well, I mainly posed it to women. And generally, there is, in as much as there is a sense of alarm about it, there is also a sense of kind of, well, what can I do? They're not making the products that are using microplastics. They utilize the products that are making that are obviously have microplastics, and so this is a problem. If you consider that over half of the world's population are female, that gives you roughly what 3.5 billion people, and let's assume that a large proportion of those people are able to shower and have access to kind of modern day shampoos and modern day kind of toothpaste. And if you consider the volume of plastics entering into the ocean, it's huge. Then add to this little report that came out recently in relation to kind of the farming industry and how much kind of the pesticides and the kind of chemicals that they're spraying all over their crops, and what happens to those, that the chemicals are going off into the waterways and eventually into the rivers, and from the rivers into the seas. You can see that there is almost a permanent chemical runoff coming off the land, and there are very few actual alternatives to it. So what I'd like to do is this. Obviously there are some kind of generalized alternatives to this, but what I'd like to do is this. I'd like to pose whoever is watching this a challenge. I really believe that where you have a problem, you have an opportunity to resolve it. There is a dire need for high-grade, kind of woman cleaning products and toothpastes and things that a person uses on a daily basis, but do not contain, destructive chemicals or do not contain microplastics. There is a huge industry awaiting you. For anybody who's watching this that has the entrepreneurial ability to think up these products, bring them to market, we will, on our channel, we'll even advertise them for you. Let's make this, it's much easier for me to go and say, listen, here is a viable alternative to your, great hair shampoo. Here's a viable alternative to your toothpaste. It's much easier to bring people alternatives that are healthy, good, and pure. Give them the information that I've just given you and allow them to make the decision. Invariably, women being the nurturers amongst us, invariably make the right decisions. They don't want to eat toxins. They don't want to eat microplastics. The big predatory fish that you're finding in sushi, they pulled samples from the livers. They pulled samples from the actual flank, the meat, what you eat. They are filled with microplastics. To cap this little story off, I'm going to just add a little impact. If you have been watching my shows, I basically talk a lot about sharing, so sharing in the hope that what we can do is form a kind of mass movement, because as I've always explained, we're a demographic to a political party. By having enough people of the same thinking, of the same mind, of the same concerns, it's a matter of time before new politicians start to spring up preaching the very things that we need to have done. And here is another great example of it, and I love to bring up these examples of it, but the Chesapeake Bay previously was having massive problems in terms of, big ocean, lake dead zones. They're absolutely depleted of any oxygen. And so the nearby city, they implemented the first kind of air quality controls and rigorously maintained these. They did this roughly about 5 years ago. Now, the result has been that, first of all, the atmosphere above the city has completely almost cleared itself. It's become cleaner, there's less smog, there's less generalized atmospheric pollution. And for the first time in this week, a report came out showing the response that the river was having to it. All the deoxygenated zones that we were seeing, both in the river, both downstream in terms of the bay that it was feeding, they have completely cleared themselves out. The river has higher oxygen content, more balanced nitrogen content, and has started to reform almost, river estuaries. They've started to reform the kind of life forms that would feed off these things. It's become an attractive place to go. Attractive place if you're a fish, that is, but it's become an attractive place to be. And it just goes to show you how adjustments in terms of legislation can start to bring around like it's a main narrative, a main story based around microplastics, the impact that microplastics will have. I've also suggested to you a whole lot of other surrounding stories, because scientists always only focus on single pieces that are all related to this. And if you think about it, you can see the scale of this problem. But you can also see a potential resolution in the form of an opportunity. The person that brings this market something that is good, clean, healthy, does the same job in terms of making your hair smell great, in terms of cleaning your toilet so it's lemon fresh, but without destroying chemicals or nasty chemicals flooding into the ocean. And lastly, as we've already been picking up in our 5-point plan, a shift over to organic farming, for argument's sake, completely rids the flow of chemicals coming off farmlands into the waterways, into the rivers. And if you think about that last story that I had about the impact of coal ash, how it's bringing about arsenic in the various different waterways, and how it's actually being picked up by farmers' boreholes. So the reality is that these are very solvable problems, but not only are they solvable, they also are a great opportunity. And where there's great opportunity, there is great minds behind it to drive it, to make it happen. And so let's make it happen. Let's bring about that change. Let's start to drive the legislation in our areas that what we're talking about is clean air. We're talking about clean waterways. We're talking about clean products that are not destroying our oceans. And we're talking about clean forms of living that are not causing a permanent chemical runoff into our oceans. I hope you enjoyed today. I enjoyed telling you, as I said, going to get a news update at the end of this week where I'll bring you some really cool stories. There's been some really cool stories that have happened inside this week. Some good news, some not so good news. But generally, I think that if you consider what I've been saying, consider where we're going, I think it's time that you share this. Just click on that little share button, share it with the people that you know. Let's make it happen. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day. Hello and good morning, and welcome to Mother Channel. My name is Jason Soul, reporting for the ENN Network. It's a beautiful Sunday. Going to cover some stories that came out this week, but there's actually been some really nice summary stories that came out this week. On Friday, I released a video update that was relating to the basic mechanics of climate change. We received a lot of very positive support from that. We also received some negative kind of feedback from people that are clearly deniers of climate change, or rather non-believers in the concept of climate change. I tried my best in the previous update to kind of bring them into a state of reality. So I'm going to address today, first of all, some of the news, and maybe you've heard it or maybe you haven't, but I urge you to check it out for yourself. I'd like to challenge anybody watching this movie, go onto Google and Google extreme weather news, and you will find out for yourself exactly what sort of extreme weather, which always is the frontal kind of shift in a varying climate. But go Google extreme weather, see for yourself what is happening all over the world. The events are simply catastrophic. California is in its longest drought that it's ever had, to the point of where, so far 66 million trees have been reported as dying. These trees, obviously, they become a fire hazard. You've already seen the raging fires that are going on inside of California, and in specific in the Sierra Nevada. In addition to this, in Phoenix, an aeroplane couldn't land because the tarmac was actually starting to melt due to extreme temperatures that were being experienced in Sierra Nevada, all across the United States, all across India, most of Asia, here in Southern Africa. You had temperatures reaching over 50 degrees and above. This is almost a continued kind of problem, month in and month out. In Karachi in Pakistan, they're experiencing such water shortages that the intensity of what's going on there is actually forced for the first emergence of what we're going to call climate refugees. These are people that are fleeing a certain area because the climate has shifted so dramatically for so long that they are no longer able to exist in a previously known area of existing, in this case Karachi, Pakistan. They're saying that it's applying massive political pressure, it's applying massive human misery. In Ethiopia, they're back to having one of the longest droughts they've ever had in 50 years. This is also implied in terms of famine. The tornado season is just warming up in the United States, but for the first time China starts experiencing tornadoes. Tornadoes are being experiencing earlier and earlier, almost year on year, every single month, for the last year and a half, a new climate record has been broken almost everywhere in the world. Most of Europe has been experiencing flood after flood after flood. It's becoming like the new normal. And yet you still have people that run around thinking, hey, well, you know, we can be okay like this. We can carry on doing exactly what we do and be okay like this. Well, I got some news for you. I mean, you know, Einstein once said that the moment that bees die off, that within the space of 5 years, most humans will die off too. And I'm not sure of the exact phrasing, was actually something similar to that. And the reason why he said that is because bees are a corner key species, meaning that their pollination ability is it's unbeatable. The bees pollinate more flowers than almost any other living species. With the loss of bees, you lose the pollination. Now, a new report coming out trying to first of all find out why all those bees are dying all over the world, because bees are dying all over the world. But they also seem unable to locate their food source, their pollination source. And it has just been shown that they're failing to find their pollination source simply due to the volume of air pollution that is in the atmosphere. Bees are the tiny micropollutants that are associated with carbon monoxide have had such an extreme reaction to bees that it is confusing them. They're unable to smell where they're going, they're unable to signal to the rest of the hive where to find the pollen, and this is causing a mass dieback in terms of bees. On top of this, then you have the added kind of negative that comes from Monsanto's drive towards nicotine-based kind of fertilizer, nicotine-based pest control, and the impact that it's had on bees. In many countries around the world, it's been made illegal, so you're no longer allowed to use nicotine-based kind of pesticides on crops. But still, the impact that it had on the bees as a species is dramatic and huge. Now, mussels, which is a common kind of food dish that people have from all over the world, it has now just been shown that due to the increasing acidity of the water, due to the increasing temperature of the water, that mussels will likely be off the menu of the world within 85 years. Now, that may seem like a long period of time, but understand, it doesn't, you have mussels every single day up until 85 years, in which case they dramatically fall off. It is a slow deterioration of mussels all around the world until you get to the point that it is no longer commercially viable to actually harvest mussels for the table because it's just too expensive. So I want you to consider something now. If you look at it, you've got all of these extreme kind of events that are happening. But you're not hearing about it on any other channel. I mean, you hear about it on my channel, but you're not hearing about it on any other channel. You hear every now and then, hey, there was a flood there, or hey, there's a raging wildfire there. But the fact is that something is happening. Now, it just happens that it corresponds with an increase in global temperatures. News reports that came out saying that we're no longer able to keep the global temperature between 1.5 to 2 degrees. This is serious news. It's serious. But it was never reported anywhere else. It's basically reported here and to those scientists that actually took the time to go ahead and read it. And so I wondered to myself, why? Like, why? Why is it that it's not covered? Why? What is the problem here? And then I remember a couple of words that my producer doesn't really want me to talk about, but I think I'm going to just use it anyway. And that is that a lot of people seem to think one of three things. First of all, that climate change is somehow a hoax. that climate change was some kind of fraud perpetuated by Al Gore. And third, that climate change is some kind of means of taxing the population. It's a means of further redistributing wealth, your wealth, to the rest of the population. And so I want to be honest with you. There's only one real fraud or hoax going on here. And that is the fraud that we still believe we can keep polluting. We can keep running around with oil-based and carbon-based kind of fuel sources and keep polluting, and it's going to have zero effect. And if you consider it, when you watch anything, you know, whether it's Al Jazeera or whether it's CNN or anything else for that matter, you're not going to get told that, hey, you know, what you're doing here, this big industry that's worth multi-billions and trillions of dollars, these Saudi princes that drive around merely because they found oil below the ground, do you honestly think they are going to allow national mainstream media to report on the fact that their product, their wealth is derived from the destruction of your environmental future? Do you really think that's going to happen? Of course it's not going to happen. Is that a fraud? I've never in my life heard of a more clear-cut case of fraud. Is it a hoax? It is a hoax for us to believe that we can actually carry on doing this. We cannot carry on doing this. We cannot carry on destroying the planet and thinking there is, you know, absolutely zero effect that is going to happen to us. Because it is definitely going to happen. And if you just start Googling, spend a bit of time actually researching before trolling people that actually have been researching, go out and find out for yourself. Read it up for yourself. We're not making it up here. We are merely reporting on it because nobody else seems capable of doing it. Now, another concept that I've also been thinking about is that a lot of people seem kind of afraid of the idea of what it means to be environmentally sane. And this will address that final point that I made in terms of whether or not it's some kind of wealth redistribution program or some kind of hoax perpetuated by the government to further tax you further. I'm going to give you a picture of what the world could potentially be. Okay? And it's you know, for some of you it's going to be like, oh no, it's a hoax. It's not a hoax. The world is actually not a bad place. People seem to have the concept that somehow, merely because we want things to be done environmentally, that your world is going to change. You've got to go put feathers and shells in your hair, and that everyone's got to go get bongo drums, and they've got to go sit and watch the sun go down while chanting and playing their bongo drums on the beach. And nothing can be further from the truth. What we are referring to here is a variation in the way that business is done. A variation in the way that you are done. You see, my concept for you is very difficult for a lot of very ignorant people to swallow. It's very difficult. And there's a lot of ignorant people out there that would prefer to believe really lame concepts. So I realized quite some time ago, almost 14 years ago, that it was impossible for me to change their minds. Ignorance is bliss in the truest sense of the word. They will run around blissfully denying everything, but the fact of the matter is that they're flawed, they're wrong. And I don't have to change their mind, and neither do you when you talk to them. The reality of what we're trying to do here is about changing the environment around people and not trying to change the person. And what does that mean? It means this. Let's evaluate business based upon the actual result set of that business. Let's take a company. So for argument's sake, I'm going to talk about coal in this instance, which is it's an easy target. So you've got a guy, he's got a coal mine, or he's gone and found a source where coal maybe can be found, okay? And what he does is he will then go and do all these geographic kind of surveys. He will establish the how big the vein is, and he will go and he will develop a business plan. He'll present that business plan to coal mining companies. The coal mining companies will assess that business plan based upon the viability of the extraction of that coal and the distribution of that coal into the marketplace and the wealth that can be accumulated from that. And for years, they can operate with a business model like this. Is it such a bad, crazy shift of idea? Is it so scary that we expect that a company that's primary business is polluting our atmosphere to have some kind of impact for polluting the atmosphere, for correcting the atmosphere? And as I said to somebody this morning, I said, you know what? It's not about another rubbish tax
that the government's just going to tax you, and they're going to take money from these companies, and nothing ever happens from it. The government will just put that tax money into their coffers, and they'll sit back and give each other raises and have a nice day. It cannot be in that model. It has to be in a model in which the actual result sets of that company, the funds that come from that company, are driven directly towards cleaning up their product. Is that such a bad thing, that a company is actually responsible for the byproduct of their product? Is it such a bad thing that a company evaluates the viability of a business based on the ability to destroy the environment for not only them, but the entire world population around them? Is that so bad? Is it so difficult to do? Take a look at electricity. A lot of people they spoke about things, oh no, the whole green movement is really just about taxing us further so that they can build up these power stations and these renewable stations and increase the cost of our electricity to offset the money that they've spent on renewable energy. And in a way, they are 100% right. They are 100% right. Most countries, including my own country, are going to do that. They are going to build up these massive solar plants, and they're going to keep billing people. You will keep paying. There will be no direct benefit, implied or inferred benefit, that is given to you. Can you pause quick? Okay, so my apologies, we were interrupted. I was talking about electricity. A lot of people seem to suspect that what will happen is the government, after making people pay extra for their electricity for putting up these big, beautiful, either wind farms or concentrated solar farms, or solar, just general photovoltaic solar farms, that the government will keep charging them and increase their taxation merely due to the government's kind of role in wanting to be green and wanting to offset emissions. Now, albeit that the government needs to offset their emissions, and albeit that it is part of their role towards controlling emissions, so moving from a coal-fired power source into a renewable source, this is all really good and well. But it is dangerous for the people that are already struggling with high power bills. So what is the fix to this? Well, we've already seen the fix to this, and there's no reason why this fix shouldn't be done everywhere in the world. Here in South Africa, that we have exactly the same problem, okay? Our government wants to put up solar farms. In fact, our government has put up solar farms. And yes, they bought those solar farms from big, European countries for a far greater rate than what is probably required. And yes, even though we have these giant solar farms or big solar farms, no benefit or direct for the actual consumer of that power is received in any way. In fact, if anything, the price of our power has increased, and this is a fear that is happening all around the world. Again, back here in South Africa, our government then takes a look at its means of resolving this, and so what they do is they propose some trillion rand, and it's a rand for us, but trillion rand nuclear plants, which is actually insane. First of all, nuclear just takes forever to erect. It takes forever. There is never yet. In fact, I will be challenged. I challenge you to find me a single example of a single nuclear plant that is A, being delivered on time, and B, being delivered on cost, which means that the actual implied cost of what they're being offered is never realized at the end of the project. So, that's pretty much it for nuclear. If you consider how long it takes to put up nuclear, if you consider the amount of effort and energy that goes into just mining the uranium for nuclear, and then basically utilizing that nuclear in terms of generating energy, and then the disposal of that kind of nuclear waste. I mean, it's a crazy concept. We're splitting an atom to boil water. That's essentially what we're doing. We're flash boiling water, and we're basically driving turbines. But to come back to my point, the problem here has nothing to do with what the government does. The problem has to do with us. The government is under the illusion that they own our grid, where nothing can be further from the truth. The grid belongs to the people. It does not belong to the government. All the infrastructure, installations, coal-fired plants, nuclear-fired plants, any means of generating electricity does not belong to the government. They are merely a short-term custodian of that facility. So the reality is that should the government then say, listen, I tell you what, instead of us continuing to build these ridiculously overpriced kind of nuclear plants, these ridiculously overpriced coal plants, what we're going to do is we're going to roll out renewable energy. And sure, renewable energy, if you go wind turbines, it requires a certain... Hello and welcome to the Mother Channel. My name is Jason Saul and today we are reporting live from the steps of the beautiful Rhodes Memorial in the Mother City, Cape Town. The Mother Channel is the channel that brings you news, live interviews and current events that are happening around the world in terms of the environment, climate change and various other topics that are related to sustainability. One of the reasons why we're filming from here as opposed to our normal locations in the deep south or near the beach or in the beautiful rolling forests is that we're going to go watch a movie called Normal is Over, which is a movie that won numerous awards at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a strikingly good story and well done, well put together. And I urge you, if you have an opportunity, to go check it out, see what you think for yourself, and maybe post some reviews about what you think about it below. We will, of course, add a link below me over here that will tell you a bit about it and give you a little taster of what it's like. The first story, and probably one of the most important stories, is related to the sea levels and the rising of the sea, which has for a long period of time been used by global warming skeptics as an indicator of whether or not global warming is actually happening or not. Now, one of the problems being is they've started recording accurately from space, in this case, sea level rise since 1991. And for a long period of time, there'd only been an annual increase of roughly 3 millimeters per year. And for most of this period, global warming skeptics have used this to their advantage to state that global warming is simply not happening. Take a look at the sea levels. Nothing seems to be showing on the sea levels, and thus the entire concept of climate change or man-made climate change is completely flawed. Further analysis of this information has picked up that in 1991, since the records started, there was a massive volcanic explosion. In fact, one of the largest recorded since 1991, and the output of that volcanic ash actually caused a global sea level decrease. And so as a result, the starting block for this data was it started off on a low level, and thus it made a flaw, an ongoing flaw that was picked up inside of the information going forward. And they expect now that the events, or rather the chemical kind of the atmospheric makeup, has started to subside as a result of that volcanic activity. They expect to see a far more dramatic increase in the level of sea level that is happening at the moment. There has actually been a massive reduction in the amount of food being taken up by, in this case, humpback whales. They are one of the toothed kind of whale species. They go along with killer whales and dolphins, obviously. But humpback whales in specific, as part of their hunting kind of lines, they dive down deep below the ocean. They roll onto their side and they scoop up eels that formed a large proportion of their diet. They can hold their breath for 30 minutes, so it wasn't a big problem for them. But as they started studying, trying to see what would happen, they noticed that as ships were passing, that the whales were no longer able to scoop up the fish. They would actually pull out of their dive, and they've realized that either they're picking up the kind of transoceanic traffic as being a threat to them and pulling out their dive, or they are unable to accurately sense where the ground floor is in order for them to turn it over, scoop up their meal. And this is to a certain extent, whales have in a way adapted to the level of noise that is made by this kind of traffic. But this is the first study that goes to show that our impact upon whale species is actually having a longer term negative effect. It remains to be seen whether this impacts other species, but the study is still ongoing. In Croatia, a series of kind of events that took place that basically increased temperatures around the seas, around the oceans, basically caused the dieback of 10,000 fish. Now, this was a huge problem. Thousands of people flocked to the beaches, and they were, stumbled across this insane sight where the whole ocean floor was just filled and filled and filled with thousands and thousands of fish dying. And this was a big problem. Obviously, it was a big smell. The authorities basically stepped in. They stopped people from picking up the fish. Obviously, they're poisonous because they've been sitting out in the sun. As it turns out, the water is too hot, and this hotness has basically caused massive oxygen drops inside of the water, which brought about the demise of fish. And the fish were basically trying to escape these zones of low oxygen, and this is what caused the event. Now, although they say it is a semi-natural event, it has never been recorded on this volume before. They have never seen the number of fish species like this before. Very similar event happened just later this week, but this time in Tanzania. And I think what you're actually starting to see is the impact of greater temperatures on the surface of various lakes, closed bodies, and obviously the ocean, and it's starting to play its role. Fourth story, I brought this up. This was in relation to a release that we did. We were talking about microplastics, but at the same time, we also had a discussion about renewable energy. And I went on and on about how China was playing a big role towards, they had an ambition, the termite mind, that basically once it focuses on getting rid of climate change or getting rid of their emissions, that everything kind of just focuses on that and they start acting upon it. Of interest, China, just almost 2 days after I issued that report, issued their statement basically saying that they intend to have 1/5, 20% of their entire energy requirements completely off-grid by 2030. Now, this is a big undertaking. They intend to do it by wind. At the moment, just to show you the kind of extent that they're doing, at the moment, China is powered 147 megawatts of their supply from wind. Combined, that is larger and more power than what they're doing in the entire area of Europe, the entire area of the United States in terms of wind power. China has also gone ahead and said that this is just the beginning. They're going to try and do more, but adding photovoltaics in their case. And it just goes to show you that when you have a concerted mind driven on the point, getting rid of these harmful emissions caused by coal-fired power stations, nuclear power stations, that you can actually do it, that it is achievable. And not only is it achievable, it's achievable by large economies. We also have to weigh this up with the fact, though, that China basically produces roughly 70% of the world's global emissions in terms of carbon and CO2 emissions and methane, and they cause a lot of damage, but it's a really good step on their behalf, something that they've taken forward and something that we're really impressed about here on the Mother Channel. Our final story is in relation to an event that came out in the United States, and I find this quite ironic because we did cover microplastics and other chemical pollutants that were entering the waterways. Well, in the United States, a new study that's been done has found that there's a kind of, or rather a chemical called PFAS. You can go Google it. As I said, I'll add the link below us. And what it is industrial chemicals that are used in the washing process, also in the manufacture of various bags, manufacturing of different kind of industrial components, often used as a fire kind of retardant in terms of airports and military bases, etc. And they found that roughly 6 million American people are affected by this phenomenon of increased toxins inside of the water, increased chemicals inside of the water, and it's having a long-term negative effect. It can cause obesity, cause cancer, and obviously have various other genetic effects that can impact upon the populace. And this is just goes hand in hand with that kind of story that we did about microplastics, where we're talking about how we don't really take care of our groundwater, how we don't take care of our waterways, and how the runoff of chemicals is starting to have an impact on people. And here You have a prime example, a study done by MIT in relation to the amount of kind of toxins and chemicals inside the water is now not only detectable, but they believe that the effects may be wider spread, meaning that it's, in this case, it goes across 33 states, but they believe it may be wider spread than that. They believe it may be impacting more people, and that the events or the effects of it are yet to be seen, but it is unacceptably high, and there's very, very little that they can actually do about it. This is water that is done, goes back into the kind of estuaries, goes back into the underground aquifers, and is drawn up for use by the municipalities or the councils in order to provide drinking water. And there's nothing you can do in terms of neutralizing the chemicals in it, and thus it brings about a massive problem in terms of drinking supply. Now, you'll probably find, in my opinion, that since it's having a direct impact upon people, that you might find that the municipalities or the councils or the government, they act a lot faster. But I bear with me a little on this, I just find it a little funny that they act upon it when it has a direct impact, that they are able to notice, able to see, they're able to kind of respond to it, but nobody is talking about the other kind of areas that are surrounding it that are obviously awash with chemicals, generally flooding out into the oceans, into large lake bodies, and nobody's really accounting for that, mainly because it's not part of the drinking supply. But obviously, it's having an impact on the biology or the biomechanisms of all those ocean species or fish species or algae species or really beneficial kind of requirements of a generally healthy ecosystem. So I think that this is a story that you're starting to see like a little front tip of. I expect that this is going to go a hell of a lot further very, very soon. Now, we're wrapping this up because we're going to go out and watch that movie. I hope you've enjoyed my update. It's been a little bit chaotic because we're kind of in a public place and a whole lot of people walking up and down, so I expect a few jump cuts here and there. As usual, if you've got any good stories that are happening in an area around you, take a clip, send it in, we'll screen it up. And I would like to thank you for joining me on this beautiful day, well, overcast day for us, but a beautiful day, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Again, okay. Hello and good morning. Welcome to the EN Network, Environmental News Network. As usual, we bring you news that actually matters. It's Friday the 20th, a beautiful day out here in Cape Town. We're on the lovely deck of Monkey Valley Resort overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. I'm going to summarize a couple of stories just happened in the last 2 days, 3 days, well, since I last kind of spoke to you. And I thought, it's a nice way to kind of round off the weekend. I'm going to start with something lighter, and then I'll get into something a little bit more extreme. So the first thing we're going to do in Africa, malaria is a real problem. And although this is not wholly related to environmental news, in a way it is directly related, bearing in mind the kind of mitigation steps that people are trying to implement to stop malaria. So you may have already heard of certain breeding techniques that people have been doing to basically sterilize males so as to reduce, in terms of the Anopheles mosquito, which is a malaria carrying mosquito. But they attempt to do genetically modify it so as to only make sterile males and therefore destroy the malaria concentration in certain areas. But in general, this is quite an expensive program, and albeit that there's a lot of money moving into it, there was an amazing little discovery, and not really even a discovery, just an amazing, innovative idea that came out of Burundi recently, which is in East Africa. Basically what they've done is they've made a bar of soap, and in this bar of soap they use shea butter, lemongrass and African marigold, amongst a couple of other kind of naturally found ingredients that are abundant in Burkina Faso. and they've made a soap that all Africans, in fact all people that are in malaria areas, if you can count on one thing, they've all got soap in their houses, and they wash themselves generally every evening. So what these guys have done is made a natural repellent for mosquitoes, but they took it a step further. They realized that once a person has washed themselves with the soap, they were concerned that the soap was going to come off. So they went seriously advanced. They made a micro capsules that are in the soap that are 100 to 150 micrometers. These are so small that they'll actually fit into the pores of your skin, and they slowly release over the course of 6 to 8 hours, which protects you in the dangerous periods of the day when mosquitoes generally have an impact. Their planning is to make it really cheap, to replace all soaps and basically get a good product out there. And that kind of innovative thinking is exactly the way we need to go. They've taken natural products, no weird advanced science, just natural products known to repel mosquitoes, turned it into a product that everybody uses, and it's a great idea. So hats off to the guys in Burkina Faso. Then we're going to move over onto the UK. In the UK, there's a lot of talk at the moment regarding wind turbines. As you know, the UK has actually made some pretty decent strides in terms of offshore wind turbines, onshore wind turbines. But there's always been numerous health complaints regarding the wind turbines. Now, these turbines are mainly, the complaints are ranging from persistent headaches to inability to sleep to grouchiness, etc., etc. And so a new study got published basically saying, well, the objective is to try and decentralize the grid, and they try to promote micro turbines, which is a smaller turbine like you see on people's houses, sometimes on yachts, and they basically put it up their house and decentralizes the grid. But of interest, when they actually studied whether or not there were health implications for people that were living near large wind turbines, it turned out that they couldn't actually determine exactly whether those implications were a result of the turbines or whether or not those were actually part of those people to start with. Now, of course, the people, they pattern match and they put the story together that they were perfectly fine until the big turbines went up. But the reality is there's a strong probability that the harmonics or the sound coming from a large-scale wind turbine is not really affecting anybody. But try tell that to the people that are complaining. Now I'm going to cover two smaller stories. They're big news, okay, but I'm actually I got to be honest with you. I'm both on our Facebook site where we publish news a lot, and just in how we talk. It's actually becoming no longer really news. It's But anyway, last month, April, yes. April was another record breaker for the hottest month on record. The month before was a record breaker, the month before was a record breaker. We are actually going through so many record breakers now, month on month, showing an increase in temperatures, showing a increasing forcing, a lower absorption of carbon dioxide, and it's almost no longer news anymore. It's news if this is the first time you're watching this, I suppose. So last month was the hottest month of record. But of interest, scientists, specifically NORAD in this case, they are projecting this year that will be the hottest year ever recorded. And they only really started recording the temperatures in the mid-1800s. But the fact of the matter is, this will be the hottest year that they've ever recorded. Now, in part, they're saying, look, a lot of it comes from El Nino, and they expect it to improve when La Nina, the little sister or the brother, my Spanish is not that good, but when that starts next year, which is projected to start next year. But the net result is, they say, even removing the El Nino effects, we are currently sitting at over 400, if I remember correctly, was 407 parts per million of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. A large proportion, as I said, due to El Nino. But the reality is, removing El Nino from the equation, you're still going to get a nasty picture. We're still going to break records. There is a definite trend that is going through this whole story, and we really need to start acting on it. We really need to start moving on it. Now, two stories which really irritated me.
and in a way they're sort of similar because we thought that governments and people knew better by now, but they don't. Now, understandably, there's a lot of kind of data that's still out on GMO products. There's a large proportion of the population, in fact myself, that no longer really believes that GMOs are necessarily healthy. It's already been established that there is no direct benefit to the farmer in terms of yields of crop. So the sense of growing GMOs only has a value in terms of having some resistance, but there's a spin-off to that resistance in that the weeds that are associated with farming have actually also developed or modified themselves so that they're now super weeds, they're almost super immune. But nevertheless, two kind of pieces of information came out about GMO. The one was released by the National Academy of Sciences, which was funded by the United States Congress. And they, of course, they were, even though they said, look, they can't find anything wrong with GMOs, the guys that actually wrote the report were quite smart because they set up multiple disclaimers within the report. They basically said what they did look for, and in addition to what they did look for, that they couldn't find any impacts which we believe are happening and most people believe are happening to the human body. Then you've also got to remember, and the way I released this on our Facebook site was that Monsanto is a large funder of Congress. I mean, it's a giant funder of Congress, okay? The United States, obviously, I don't think they will ever release a report that is negative to Monsanto, considering that's where Monsanto came from. Does it really surprise you that Congress and likely the National Academy of Science in the United States is going to find anything differently to what a large donor wants them to find? I seriously doubt it. But as I said, the information is still out. So on the tail of that, there goes Canada, who have now genetically modified a salmon, okay, a fish. And they, if I remember the name correctly, it was called the aqueous salmon or the adventure salmon or some insane name for a salmon. Now, of course, the Canadian government said, hey, look, we find that this is nutritious and this is helpful, but obviously they have to justify their decision. But what they always forget, as most politicians do that are getting funded by people, is they always forget, first of all, no definitive studies have been done on the effects of a GMO or genetically modified salmon. Second of all, even assuming that genetically modified salmon was okay, that should that genetically modified salmon escape to the wild, which is an extreme probability bearing in mind where you're actually farming these things, what happens then? What happens when it crosses with another natural species of salmon? What are the end results? What are the implications that happens? Genetic weakness, more cancer? You know, at the end of the day, we're playing with something that we really have no idea about. And this brings me back to it's a very distressing story for me about Norway. Okay, now first of all, I've never been fond of Norway for many reasons. I mean, I love the Norwegian people, don't get me wrong if you're Norwegian. But first of all, that whole thing where they go and slaughter the dolphins, I mean, that's just wrong. I'm sorry, it's disgusting. And yes, well, but it's also Norway, sorry. And also scientific hunting of whales, you know, that's also a big problem. But if you consider that Norway of late, I think, is one of the only countries that has paid its bills in terms of it's got zero debt. The people seem very advanced in terms of the way that they think. And yet the Norwegian government goes and opens up parts of the Barents Sea to oil exploration. Now, I mean, you know, if you think about where we are in 2016, you know, everyone is trying to get away from oil, and here they're opening up this massive area of the sea to oil exploration. And you know, you have to remember that it's not long since the Deepwater Horizon spill, one of maybe the largest, you know, kind of oil kind of, you know, accidents, in environmental accidents ever. And then they go and open it up again. Now, environmentalists in the area are extremely concerned
the area that they want to go into is previously, a pristine piece of ocean. And essentially what they're doing is going to open it up again for exploration, which means they're basically going to screw it up. And I'd just like to say shame on you, Norway, and for whoever actually allowed this through. They've allowed themselves to be back-pocketed by the large industries that are trying to get their hands back into oil. We've got to get rid of this oil idea. This oil concept is bad. It's not something that we want to carry on with. And it's time that we start shutting these things down. So that about summarizes all the things that I'm going through today. By tomorrow there'll be a whole bunch of news stories, probably equally terrifying, equally scary. But the reality is that while the whole world right now is talking about an Egypt airline crash in the Mediterranean, here on ENN Network we're actually talking about things that are dramatically dangerous for you, your family, your future generations and this planet. So again and finally, you can, if you're tired of my voice now, you can kind of shut it out. But again, this is a call out to all those people that are in all over the world, wherever you are, wherever you're watching. We're looking for news and stories of environmental events that are happening on a localized scale in your area, things that are important in your area, and things that are newsworthy in terms of letting people know what's happening. We need to start to track the whole changing environment as a holistic picture as reported from all over the world. I urge you to take the time, even if it's a cell phone snap or a little video snap, just take the time, just put it in there, send it to us, we're going to make it go live. I hope to see you and soon hope to be flighting something that you've put up. And I want to thank you for your time today and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers. Hello and welcome to the Mother Channel. My name is Jason Soul. I'm reporting on behalf of the Environmental News Network. The date today is the 30th of June 2016, a date that you are going to remember. Now, it's been a little bit of a strange morning for me. I spent a part of it in a semi-surreal state, and I'm going to explain to you why. Yesterday, we actually filmed our normal midweek kind of update of traditional reports that came out, and that was kind of structured for me in the morning yesterday. By midday yesterday, a report came out that went out to the United States Congress based on the 31 scientific kind of institutes. In fact, it was the top 31 scientific institutes in the world that represent roughly a few million scientists, that basically issued out this letter to the United States Congress urging them to take immediate action on climate change and warning them of impending dangers that are going to be derived from taking no action in climate change. Now, this letter has some 2009. However, the difference with this letter is that it was backed by 31 of the world's largest scientific institutes, including the American Chemical Society, which is the world's largest scientific institute. They cover almost every discipline of science known to mankind. And here they are, signing off on a letter urging Congress to take immediate action, and specifically not to delay on any action that will prevent carbon dioxide, methane, and problems that are resulting from climate change. Now, this morning after I filmed that, I thought to myself, it's actually quite strange if you think about it. I mean, it's like a fairly random event. They issue one letter in 2009, they issue another letter here in 2016. And I mean, like, why? I mean, why pick a Wednesday? I mean, what, did they have nothing better to do? What were they like running around and going, hey, well, what we're going to do, we're going to just sign off on a letter that urges Congress to take action. And it didn't make sense to me until I picked up the reports that came out from the Institute of Advanced Analytical Science, which is one of the world's largest mathematical bodies and analysis bodies. And they have basically made a statement that is so profound that today is actually historic, because today is the day that you were told And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you basically roughly what that report contained. It basically said that the 190 nations that basically contributed to the COP21 in Paris, they made what's called an emissions target, meaning that they will meet certain emission standards and reduce the heating of the planet. Well, as of this morning, it is now quantified that we are not going to meet those targets, that the entire COP21 that was held actually failed, that we are no longer going to be able to maintain planetary temperature below 2 degrees, and that they should revise their targets upwards from 2.6 degrees to 3 degrees. Now this is actually quite profound. It's actually it's insane, because we already know that runaway climate change sits somewhere between 2 degrees and 3 degrees. First time today, we were actually told that there is no longer an opportunity, that no action taken by any government, any person, no action barring some miraculous discovery that somehow sucks carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, is going to stop the effects of climate change. And what this really means for you and I is that our future is really bleak. It's really, really bleak. And it's no longer like an if or a but or a maybe. It is certain, it is set. Nothing, no action that we take is going to alter that, barring some miracle. So today is historic because today is the first day that you were informed that this planet, without question, is going to meet the full, ramified, magnified effects of climate change, and that barring a miracle, there is nothing that we can do. Absolutely nothing. So I put this forward to the producer this morning. I said to them, hey, listen, this is what's happened. I said that I wanted to rather use this report because it's a massive day. And I spent, as I said, I spent this morning in an almost surreal state, because people that actually understand what that really means, it's quite terrifying. After I read it, I got up and I walked around and I thought to myself, and I listened to people and I listened to them talking about things that we're doing in the day. And even as you sit here and listen to me, you're going to kind of just carry on with your day. Maybe after this you're going to click close and you're going to go look at those cute pictures of little fluffy rabbits on the internet, or you're going to, your day is kind of going to carry on. But what you don't understand is that all around the world, science has basically failed. We've failed in stopping a huge event, and there is nothing that we are going to do now to stop an incredible warming. So all of those ice melts, all of those kind of flooding, all of those extreme drought, extreme cold, all of those weather extremes, they are now the norm, and they're going to get worse, and they're going to get more extreme. And those events in terms of water, those events in terms of deoxygenation and acidification of the ocean, they are now set. There is no way that we are going to stop them. There is absolutely no way. In fact, at the rate we're going to hit a 2.6. And who knows if that's runaway? Who knows if runaway climate change then starts to unfold, and then it's pretty much game over for every living species on this planet. So when I finished reading this, I got up and I was listening to what people were talking about, and I thought, the crazy thing for me is that they don't know. They don't know. This morning there was that terrible news about, that shooting, the bomb blasts and the stuff like that happened in Turkey, and the more information that was coming out of Brexit and Mexit, and this is what the whole world was concentrating about. This is what everyone was talking about. Everyone was going on and on about like localized events that were happening for them. Like in South Africa, we go on about the political situation and the violence and the crime rate and things like this. And as I say, they're important, but you don't actually understand the significance of what's actually just happened. The window of opportunity to end one of the most globally catastrophic events is now closed, barring some miracle. So I put it forward, as I was saying to the producer earlier, and I was saying, this is what's happened, and I want to completely get rid of yesterday's report, and I want to only do this report because this is really important. This is really important. So she said to me, well, on hearing the news, because she understands it probably greater than I do, and she said, well, why don't you at least put out the solutions? So I said, well, there are no solutions. She said, yes, but at least we can tell people what they can do. So I'm going to put this slightly differently because I'm a very logical person and she's a very passionate environmentalist. So if you look at the top bar of the Mother Channel, you will see that there is a toolbar, a drop-down bar that has solutions. And on those solutions, there is, normal solutions, things like eat organic, only eat meat once a week, those kind of things. And then there's what's called radical solutions, in which case it's like the ditch everything and just go all, balls to the wall, excuse my French, but balls to the wall, do everything mathematically possible to end this problem. So I'm going to tell you because I find it quite interesting, you see. So if you wanted to end climate change, for argument's sake, what you would need to do is stop driving completely. No more cars. Do not turn on your engine. Do not get out of your house. Do not start your car unless it's a battery-driven vehicle. When you stop going to work, do not go to work. Work based on this economy of greed, in which case we are continually looking to expand the economy based on resources and destruction of the environment. You have to stop going to it. You have to give up the concept of money. You have to give up the concept of eating meat on a daily basis. And I must just tell you this, that I enjoy steak and whatever. I don't eat a lot of meat. But I enjoy it, but you don't have to get rid of it completely, but you have to cut it down. You can have meat once a week kind of thing. Because half of the problem is the methane derived from meat. In fact, it's one of the last kind of critical components in terms of getting rid of carbon dioxide. Yes, you can't get rid of all the carbon dioxide because we don't have good sequestration, but you can get rid of the methane, which has roughly 5 times, 6 times the warming effect of carbon dioxide. And the simplest, easiest, lowest hanging fruit in order to do that is just eat less meat. Just eat less meat. That's a very important thing. Another thing is organics. We've got to switch over to a mode of where we're eating organic food. Now, she obviously takes it from the health perspective, but I'm not the healthiest kind of person. I love my pizza and things like this, but you've got to eat organic food. And not so much because of the health benefits, of which they are numerous in terms of eating organics, but primarily because of the farming methods derived to actually deliver the food to your table. So where an organic methodology is good for the soil, it helps for the kind of bacterial that's resident in the soil. It helps maintain the nutrients in the soil, helps traps carbon dioxide in the soil. But more importantly, doesn't allow for runoff of the chemicals that they use in normal agriculture. The normal chemicals, so all chemicals, every chemical that we use ultimately flows into the sea. So everything is, when you're washing your hair, well, no matter what you do, the chemicals that you're utilizing, both that's put on your plate, ultimately your children eat, both that you put on your body, both that you clean your house with, all of that, every single bit of it flows into the sea. And if you remember a while back, I issued a report about the Baltic, and I issued the report about the Mediterranean, about them finding this whole bunch of unknown chemicals in the Mediterranean. Well, it's all derived from the same factors. Mass industrial kind of economies that are basically mass producing food, mass producing products, mass producing plastic, and the runoff, the byproducts of these. So now the trick is this. The basic steps are this. You stop driving completely. You don't go to work. I'm sure there must be solutions up there and about how you're going to feed yourself. You must change to organic food. You must stop. Not stop, but you need to cut down on the amount of meat you eat. You have to switch to renewable wherever possible. So wherever possible. But most importantly, you have to start to share this information with others and petition others to share it with other people. In this way, when you have a whole world that is all focused on the same thing, maybe you have a shot of ending this problem. But the reality is, and you and I both know this, that what's going to happen once you finish watching this is you're going to click it, you're going to close it, you're going to somehow in your mind justify it. You're going to somehow kind of work out a means that, hey, what he said today was actually not that important. You're going to go to bed, you're going to go read a book, you're going to go watch TV, you maybe going to go out and have a beer with your friends, whatever it is you're going to do. The fact of the matter is, the probability of you doing something is very small. The probability of 7 billion people doing something is almost zero. But that is the only way that you are going to stop the effects based on the news that was issued today. That is the dramatic, the action that needs to be taken in order to stop it. There is no political will to stop it. There is no industrial interest in stopping it. There is no chief executive that's going to step off his wagon and go, hey, you know what? Our company is destroying the environment. We're going to stop it. It's not going to happen. We know it's not going to happen. You're going to drive somewhere. You're going to get in your car and you're going to drive somewhere. The infrastructure that will support a sustainable world is not yet in place. Those companies that are currently destroying the environment, they could switch over to producing infrastructure that will support the world. We can still live a normal life. We do not have to have tree huggers running everywhere with feathers in our hair and shells hanging off our earrings and going kumbaya for every full moon. It doesn't need to be like that. But I am telling you right now that unless something dramatic happens, the effects of what happens to a 2.6 degree warmer planet is unstoppable. It's going to happen. And it's going to be so dramatic. All those movies that you've seen about like End of Days, you know, where they've got like these massive waves coming through. The only drawback about those massive waves is because they picture the destruction in a short pace of time. Yeah, so it's interesting for us to watch because we're kind of horrified by the concept of this giant wave, and then the freezing of the whole of New York. I don't know if you remember this, but we like it because it happens in a short, kind of time frame. But the environment, in truth, the planet, doesn't actually work like that. The planet is going to do that. It will do that. But over a longer time. It's a 30-year movie. It's not a 1.5 hour movie. The events that you saw there, however catastrophic, are completely possible based on the news that came out today and based on an ever-increasing warmer planet. So I put it to you now because you see today, I would like you to write down in your diary because today you were told. Today you were told what you had to do, and I'm counting on the fact that it's pretty much going to be another ordinary day for everybody here. And everybody is just going to kind of carry on their day. And there's a certain beauty to that. You know what the beauty is? The beauty is you no longer have to believe the science. You no longer have to believe even me or anybody else that tries to tell you about climate change. Because as of today, you are going to experience it for yourself firsthand.
Hello and welcome to the Environmental News Network. We are filming from the lovely Constantia Valley with helicopters flying overhead, birds tweeting all around us, and I am basically going to cover some information that is deemed extremely important in terms of the environment, and it is actually extremely important. I mean, it's actually crazy important, but you sitting there in your house may or may not be aware of this. But it is actually so important that we've gone out of our way just to reiterate certain points of this. So the story actually starts a long time ago, but the part that I'm going to start with is the Great Barrier Reef, which was the first kind of point that it started becoming to everyone's attention. As some of you may or may not have heard, the Great Barrier Reef has been in slow decline over a period of time, and what is known as coral bleaching, which is basically this beautiful, lovely, luscious coral. It basically bleaches into this dull gray or dull white kind of shade due to lack of nutrients and ocean acidification. So a report was released roughly about 3 weeks ago, in which it's the most comprehensive study ever done on the reef, which they're saying that roughly 83% of the Great Barrier Reef is now dead. The question is whether or not, well, it's the top surface, remember that. The question is whether or not the Great Barrier Reef will be able to recover
from such an event. And it is deemed extremely unlikely that the Great Barrier Reef is going to be able to recover. So as a result of this, people have taken some dramatic steps. They've basically gone and they're looking at doing things that neutralize the pH content of the top surface of the water in an attempt to basically remove the acidification problem that is causing the bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef. The problem really is, though, is that what's happening on the Great Barrier Reef is not a micro problem. So it's not a local problem. The problem that's happening on the Great Barrier Reef is actually a macro problem. And what that means is that there is no action that can be taken by any person in Australia, New Zealand, any of the surrounding islands. There is absolutely nothing that they can do about it, because what you are really witnessing is the impact of the macro event of climate change that is having a direct impact not only on the Great Barrier Reef, but on reefs all around the world. And what that means is that if you start looking at the kind of articles we've put out much news articles about this that's been published rather widely, and there is kind of social activists that are trying to start campaigns, save the Great Barrier Reef, save the Great Barrier Reef, all over Facebook, Twitter, and various other groups. But the reality is that there is absolutely nothing that can be done to save the Great Barrier Reef, because it's a macro problem caused by overall climate change. So the thinking behind the Great Barrier Reef, if you understand that it is like the heart of the ocean. I mean, there nowhere else in the world is such a diverse, large kind of place in the ocean found with such a density of life. So in a way, it's like the heart of the ocean. When you and I don't know how old you are, where most of us, a lot of us were born, the Great Barrier Reef was an abundant, beautiful place. And inside of our time, we're actually going to see the death of the heart of the ocean. And, no social activism is going to stop it. The only thing that is going to stop it is if we eventually kind of move away from this idea of climate change. But bearing in mind that 83% of the reef is already dead, the probability of us being able to stop it is almost zero. So then, sorry, I've just been corrected. It was 93% of the reef is dead. That's actually right. So then it brings us to another component. So now take that story and throw that story on one side of your mind, okay? And then it comes to another part of the story. Now they were looking, a study was recently done on what is causing ocean acidification. But while they were studying that, they were looking at oxygen levels inside of the ocean. Now there is a relationship between the volume of plankton that is present in the water and their ability to sequester carbon dioxide. The ocean, despite what you may have heard, is actually the largest sequesterer of carbon dioxide. And when I say sequester, I mean that it takes in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. So the ocean is actually the largest, what we call a carbon sink. So it's bigger than the rainforest, bigger than any other arboreal forest, it's bigger than any thing that we have done. The ocean actually does most of the work. So most of the oxygen that you're breathing comes from the ocean. And I'm going to come to that point in a little bit. I'm just going to explain a bit about the dynamics of what's happening in the ocean. So basically plankton are responsible for bringing oxygen from the surface of the water, bringing carbon dioxide from the surface of the water, and they harness that as they keep the carbon, they release the oxygen. But because the top surface of the water has been heated, because of the amount of sunlight that is impacting on the ocean, the plankton are no longer able to reach the top surface of the water, and thus, even though they are still filtering some carbon dioxide that is resident, because that's what acidification is, it's an increase in carbon dioxide, it's mainly carbon that they're picking up, and there's less oxygen going around the ocean. So the report came out that basically said by 2030, you would start to see off all shores, or you would start to see obvious signs of lack of oxygen inside of the water. And there's another report that came out, but it's kind of minor by comparison, but it's still significantly important, is that the plankton is responsible for bringing that oxygen right from the top surface levels right to all the levels going down the marine chain as far as it can. And what this does is it enables a healthy marine environment where creatures are of all different kind of levels in the ocean are capable of eating or breathing. So with the loss of oxygen in the water, with the reduction in oxygen in the water, and with the growing kind of losses of oxygen in the water, the impact on marine life is projected to be devastating. Devastating. So what you're talking about is the loss of massive marine chains. So where you and I now can walk into the store and pick up like fish, a large proportion of those fish are they're dying. They're dying. So because they're just dying of suffocation, there is nothing for them to actually breathe. So the impacts, the knock-on effect impacts that this has is dramatic. So now if you take that and put that in the side as well, along with our little story about the Great Barrier Reef, what you're left with is an interesting little study that's been done, and something that we've actually here at Brave Green World, we've been monitoring for quite some time. In fact, it was a question that was raised a while back. When you were in school, you got taught, so you said, like, how much oxygen is actually in the atmosphere, okay? So the common phrase that we throw around is 21%. 21% of oxygen is available in the atmosphere, which means that for every breath that you take, you're taking in some helium, some argon, some oxygen, but of that, 21% is actually oxygen. Now, if you understand the fundamentals of climate change, what they're saying is that there's an increase in carbon dioxide. So from combustion, like we're burning carbon, from kind of, exhaust, carbon monoxide. So from all of these things, there is a combustion process that's taking. It's what's called oxidization, which means that in order to release carbon in the form of smoke or byproduct, it has to attach itself to an oxygen so that it becomes lighter and it floats up. So that's how you get carbon dioxide, which means that there's a direct mathematical relationship between the volume of carbon dioxide versus the volume of oxygen. So some studies were done about this, because what we wanted to find out was, what is the actual oxygen? You can't have an increase in carbon dioxide without having a corresponding decrease in oxygen. So we wanted to see what studies were done in relation to the amount of atmospheric oxygen that's available. And so far, the results are kind of sketchy. Scientists actually blatantly stated in the document that they just don't know. So they've done some recordings. Some cities, they've picked up oxygen contents as low as 14%, some as low as 17%. And these are just patches. If you imagine patches floating around above cities that are deoxygenated. And now you can see it all starts to make sense. Inside of your ocean, you're now getting patches of loss of oxygen. Inside of your atmosphere, you're getting loss of oxygen. And those same losses of oxygen are starting to have an impact on the marine ecosystem, which is in turn having an impact on what you're seeing in the Great Barrier Reef. And so for the first time, actually, all the little pieces of a puzzle are starting to coalesce into one big story. And that story is happening right now. Right now, as I say this, it's happening. And what are you and I really capable of doing about it? Nothing. What are you and I capable of bringing about some kind of change that will affect it? We are powerful. But this has got to be bigger than some social media campaign. This has got to be a fundamental change in the way that we're going about doing business. What it means is that there's greater level of sunlight that is hitting the ocean. The ocean is absorbing more heat because all it is really energy transfer. So there is more energy inside of our atmospheric system than there is outside of our atmospheric system. And what that does is it starts to heat up the top surface of the water. And because the top surface of water begins to heat up, what it really does is anything. It's the same thing that happens with any water. If you heat up water, it expands. As there's more energy absorbed by the ocean, there's lower oxygen inside of the ocean. There's greater ocean acidification, which is reducing plankton. And ultimately, it is now starting to have an impact not only on marine-based kind of oxygen levels, but also on atmospheric-based oxygen levels. And this is a story that is actually more serious than anything you're going to hear You know, it's more serious than anything that you're going to read. It's more serious than anything that you're actually going to uncover this week. And you know, you can put it in your head, you can do what you like with it. But the fact is that if you take a look, and I'm just going to reiterate why ENN is actually important. If you look at what the news was covering inside of this week, we covered things on CNN like Trump. We covered a whole lot of rubbish that's related to events on the field. But why is nobody talking about this? Because this, in your lifetime, no longer is it 2100, the famed, this is when we'll see the effects of climate change. We're talking something that is only 14 years away before you are going to see significant changes in the oxygen content of the surface of the ocean, and thus it's going to impact those that eat seafood. It's going to impact the entire marine chain, and it's going to impact oxygen levels. And when scientists were asked, what happens if the oxygen levels get to a low point? What is the net effect? What is the safety level for human beings? You know what they said? They don't know. They don't know. Now think about that. Just put that in the back of your head. Remember, for all of you that are going to be watching Donald Trump go on and attack Hillary Clinton, and you're going to watch Bernie Sanders try climb all over Clinton, and how important that is, the reality is that day by day, the oxygen content of this atmosphere that you're relying on to watch those things is actually running out. So I want to thank you for your time in watching ENN. Remember that this is the channel that is going to bring you actual news, real news that's actually important to you and actually has meaning to not only you but everybody else on Earth. ENN is the one channel where you're going to actually find out the things that are important. So thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your day. Hello and welcome to the Environmental News Network. We are filming from the lovely Constantia Valley with helicopters flying overhead, birds tweeting all around us, and I am basically going to cover some information that is deemed extremely important in terms of the environment, and it is actually extremely important. I mean, it's actually crazy important, but you sitting there in your house may or may not be aware of this. But it is actually so important that we've gone out of our way just to reiterate certain points of this. So the story actually starts a long, long time ago, but the part that I'm going to start with is the Great Barrier Reef, which was the first kind of point that it started becoming to everyone's attention. As some of you may or may not have heard, the Great Barrier Reef has been in slow decline over a period of time, and what is known as coral bleaching, which is basically this beautiful, lovely, luscious coral. It basically bleaches into this dull gray or dull white kind of shade due to lack of nutrients and ocean acidification. So a report was released roughly about 3 weeks ago, in which it's the most comprehensive study ever done on the reef, which they're saying that roughly 83% of the Great Barrier Reef is now dead. The question is whether or not, well, it's the top surface, remember that. The question is whether or not the Great Barrier Reef will be able to recover from such an event. And it is deemed extremely unlikely that the Great Barrier Reef is going to be able to recover. So as a result of this, people have taken some dramatic steps. They've basically gone and they're looking at doing things that neutralize the pH content of the top surface of the water in an attempt to basically remove the acidification problem that is causing the bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef. The problem really is, though, is that what's happening on the Great Barrier Reef is not a micro problem. So it's not a local problem. The problem that's happening on the Great Barrier Reef is actually a macro problem. And what that means is that there is no action that can be taken by any person in Australia, New Zealand, any of the surrounding islands. There is absolutely nothing that they can do about it, because what you are really witnessing is the impact of the macro event of climate change that is having a direct impact not only on the Great Barrier Reef, but on reefs all around the world. What that means is that if you start looking at the kind of articles we've put out much news articles about this, that's been published rather widely, and there is kind of social activists that are trying to start campaigns, save the Great Barrier Reef, save the Great Barrier Reef, all over Facebook, Twitter, and various other groups. But the reality is that there is absolutely nothing that can be done to save the Great Barrier Reef, because it's a macro problem caused by overall climate change. So the thinking behind the Great Barrier Reef, if you understand that it is like the heart of the ocean. I mean, there nowhere else in the world is such a diverse, large kind of place in the ocean found with such a density of life. So in a way, it's like the heart of the ocean. When you and I don't know how old you are, but when most of us, a lot of us were born, the Great Barrier Reef was an abundant, beautiful place. And inside of our time, we're actually going to see the death of the heart of the ocean. And, no social activism is going to stop it. The only thing that is going to stop it is if we eventually kind of move away from this idea of climate change. But bearing in mind that 83% of the reef is already dead, the probability of us being able to stop it is almost zero. So then, sorry, I've just been corrected. It was 93% of the reef is dead. That's actually right. So then it brings us to another component. So now take that story and throw that story on one side of your mind, okay? And then it comes to another part of the story. Now they were looking, a study was recently done on what is causing ocean acidification. But while they were studying that, they were looking at oxygen levels inside of the ocean. Now there is a relationship between the volume of plankton that is present in the water and their ability to sequester carbon dioxide. The ocean, despite what you may have heard, is actually the largest sequesterer of carbon dioxide. And when I say sequester, I mean that it takes in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. So the ocean is actually the largest, what we call a carbon sink. So it's bigger than the rainforest, bigger than any other arboreal forest. It's bigger than anything that we have done. The ocean actually does most of the work. So most of the oxygen that you're breathing comes from the ocean. I'm going to come to that point in a little bit. I'm just going to explain a bit about the dynamics of what's happening in the ocean. So basically, plankton are responsible for bringing oxygen from the surface of the water, bringing carbon dioxide from the surface of the water, and they harness that as they keep the carbon, they release the oxygen. But because the top surface of the water has been heated, because of the amount of sunlight that is impacting on the ocean, the plankton are no longer able to reach the top surface of the water, and thus, even though they are still filtering some carbon dioxide that is resident, because that's what acidification is, it's an increase in carbon dioxide, it's mainly carbon that they're picking up, and there's less oxygen going around the ocean. So the report came out that basically said by 2030, you would start to see off all shores, or you would start to see obvious signs of lack of oxygen inside of the water. And there's another report that came out, but it's kind of minor by comparison, but it's still significantly important, is that the plankton is responsible for bringing that oxygen right from the top surface levels right to all the levels going down the marine chain as far as it can. And what this does is it enables a healthy marine environment where creatures are of all different kind of levels in the ocean are capable of eating or breathing. So with the loss of oxygen in the water, with the reduction in oxygen in the water, and with the growing kind of losses of oxygen in the water, the impact on marine life is projected to be devastating. Devastating. So what you're talking about is the loss of massive marine chains. So where you and I now can walk into the store and pick up like fish, a large proportion of those fish are they're dying. They're dying. So because they're just dying of suffocation, there is nothing for them to actually breathe. So the impacts, the knock-on effect impacts that this has is dramatic. So now if you take that and put that in the side as well, along with our little story about the Great Barrier Reef, what you're left with is an interesting little study that's been done, and something that we've actually here at Brave Green World, we've been monitoring for quite some time. In fact, it was a question that was raised a while back. When you were in school, you got taught, so you said, like, how much oxygen is actually in the atmosphere, okay? So the common phrase that we throw around is 21%. 21% of oxygen is available in the atmosphere, which means that for every breath that you take, you're taking in some helium, some argon, some oxygen, but of that, 21% is actually oxygen. Now, if you understand the fundamentals of climate change, what they're saying is that there's an increase in carbon dioxide. So from combustion, like we're burning carbon, from kind of exhaust, carbon monoxide. So from all of these things, there is a combustion process that's taking. It's what's called oxidization, which means that in order to release carbon in the form of smoke or byproduct, it has to attach itself to an oxygen so that it becomes lighter and it floats up. So that's how you get carbon dioxide, which means that there's a direct mathematical relationship between the volume of carbon dioxide versus the volume of oxygen. So some studies were done about this, because what we wanted to find out was, what is the actual oxygen? You can't have an increase in carbon dioxide without having a corresponding decrease in oxygen. So we wanted to see what studies were done in relation to the amount of atmospheric oxygen that's available. And so far, the results are kind of sketchy. Scientists actually blatantly stated in the document that they just don't know. So they've done some recordings. Some cities, they've picked up oxygen contents as low as 14%, some as low as 17%. And these are just patches. If you imagine patches floating around above cities that are deoxygenated. And now you can see it all starts to make sense. Inside of your ocean, you're now getting patches of loss of oxygen. Inside of your atmosphere, you're getting loss of oxygen. And those same losses of oxygen are starting to have an impact on the marine ecosystem, which is in turn having an impact on what you're seeing in the Great Barrier Reef. And so, for the first time, actually, all the little pieces of a puzzle are starting to coalesce into one big story. And that story is happening right now. Right now, as I say this, it's happening. And what are you and I really capable of doing about it? Nothing. What are you and I capable of bringing about some kind of change that will affect it? We are powerful, but this has got to be bigger than some social media campaign. This has got to be a fundamental change in the way that we're going about doing business. What it means is that there's greater level of sunlight that is hitting the ocean. The ocean is absorbing more heat because all it is really energy transfer. So there is more energy inside of our atmospheric system than there is outside of our atmospheric system. And what that does is it starts to heat up the top surface of the water. And because the top surface of water begins to heat up, what it really does is anything. It's the same thing that happens with any water. If you heat up water, it expands. As there's more energy absorbed by the ocean, there's lower oxygen inside of the ocean. There's greater ocean acidification, which is reducing plankton. And ultimately, it is now starting to have an impact not only on marine-based kind of oxygen levels, but also on atmospheric-based oxygen levels. And this is a story that is actually more serious than anything you're going to hear. You know, it's more serious than anything that you're going to read. It's more serious than anything that you're actually going to uncover this week. And you know, you can put it in your head, you can do what you like with it. But the fact is that if you take a look, and I'm just going to reiterate why ENN is actually important. If you look at what the news was covering inside of this week, we covered things on CNN like Trump. We covered a whole lot of rubbish that's related to events on the field. But why is nobody talking about this? Because this, in your lifetime, no longer is it 2100, the fame, this is when we'll see the effects of climate change. We're talking something that is only 14 years away before you are going to see significant changes in the oxygen content of the surface of the ocean, and thus it's going to impact those that eat seafood. It's going to impact the entire marine chain, and it's going to impact oxygen levels. And when scientists were asked, what happens if the oxygen levels get to a low point? What is the net effect? What is the safety level for human beings? You know what they said? They don't know. They don't know. Now think about that. Just put that in the back of your head. Remember, for all of you that are going to be watching Donald Trump go on and attack Hillary Clinton, and you're going to watch Bernie Sanders try climb all over Clinton, and how important that is, the reality is that day by day, the oxygen content of this atmosphere that you're relying on to watch those things is actually running out. So I want to thank you for your time in watching ENN. Remember that this is the channel that is going to bring you actual news, real news that's actually important to you and actually has meaning to not only you but everybody else on Earth. ENN is the one channel where you're going to actually find out the things that are important. So thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your day. Okay. Hello and good morning, and welcome to the Environmental News Network. We are reporting live from the beautiful Monkey Valley Resort in the Mother City, and you're watching us on the Mother Channel. ENN is the Environmental News Network, and my name is Jason Soul, and thank you for watching. We're reporting on the coldest and shortest day of the year in the summer in the southern hemisphere, my apologies. And as such, it being a little cold, especially cold because Monkey Valley Resort is overlooking the beach. But what we're going to do is we're going to keep it kind of brief because I'm a little on the cold side, as you can see by my scarf. I've got some stories that are pretty interesting, and I hope you're going to enjoy them. Since 1977, the CITES, which is an acronym for a whole bunch of words, basically Convention on the International Trade of Ivory and Endangered Species, has been in place that basically protected rhinos, elephants, and other creatures that are considered to be endangered from international trade. In certain countries, it has been looked at more or less, but in South Africa has the largest population of rhino anywhere in the world. We have roughly 5,000 creatures that are here in South Africa. And just recently, in fact last week, a Supreme Court decision took place that basically would enable the trading of rhino here within the borders, because they can dictate how we deal with rhino or ivory trade across the borders, but they weren't able to block us internally inside of our own country. Now this is quite interesting because, as you know, a lot of poaching and anti-poaching efforts are taking place. The rhino horn specifically is being poached for some of the craziest reasons. I'm just going to list three, because one of them is just like a little retarded in my opinion. It's just my opinion. But obviously you've got the usual as an aphrodisiac, which is generally by Asian countries, they use it as an aphrodisiac. The other one is to cure cancer. Someone told somebody that you could cure cancer through the use of a rhino horn. And then lastly, to cure a hangover. Now I want you to imagine how many people there are in the world and how few rhinos there are, 5,000, and we're the largest population group in the country. And yet they're using it to cure a hangover, which is, it's pathetic. Anyway, the rhino kind of trade here locally was taken forward by the Private Association of Rhino Owners. In fact, specifically it was taken forward by a guy called Pelham Jones, who actually fought the case on behalf of the private rhino owners in this country. And it raises an interesting question in relation to rhino trade. Now, you know, generally you take either one side or another. Either you're indifferent to the trading of rhino or ivory, or you're generally against it. You'll see a lot of people wearing, I don't support poaching, but there is another argument to this, and this is what Pelham Jones is bringing forward, and this is the basis upon which he basically had it, that they lifted the ban on local rhino trading. Now, Pelham Jones says that the ban on ivory is in fact more damaging to the rhino trade, to the species, than it is beneficial. And the reason for this is this: because they've banned the international trade of ivory, what's happened is that it's caused a large backlash of poaching. So meaning that ivory is illegally obtained. And what happens is the price of the tusk skyrockets. But more importantly, for people with private parks that they own their own rhino, they basically are under a critical list of having to defend their borders from potential poachers, which obviously comes at a really big price. But more importantly, they generally tend to lose this battle. So what happens is, because they can't sell the tusk that comes from the horn, that comes from the rhino, there's no benefit to them in having the rhino, which has actually indirectly caused a decline in the rhino population. And a lot of private rhino owners have moved their beasts off their sites. But at the same time, rhino has an interesting kind of way of living. They actually shed their horn. So once their horn gets to a certain length, the horn sheds, and the rhino grows a new horn, because it's just keratin. It's the same stuff that your fingernails are made from. So what he's saying is that by allowing the trade of ivory, or rhino tusks in this case, locally, what it does is it allows the rhino owners to actually make an income from their rhinos, invest that money into growing more rhinos, and thereby actually adding to the conservation of the rhino or of the species. And it's an interesting argument. You've got to kind of pick your side. I see where he's coming in from, but my fear is that the demand is far greater than any kind of naturalized rhino farming will be. He does also have the added benefit that if it is legally traded, meaning locally within South Africa for whatever purposes, that the benefit is that the price of poached ivory and poached horn diminishes, because it's easily obtainable. And so that's kind of the quagmire that people that are in the rhino business find themselves. Be really interested to hear your viewpoints, or people specifically that are related to the industry's viewpoints. I think it's quite important, because it's not a bad kind of approach to it. Now, my third story, I'm actually going to shift it around. I seem to shift it around all the time, but this is in relation to the South Pole. Now, as you know, global carbon has been roughly over 400 parts per million for a bit of time. In fact, there's a standard growth by 2 parts per million of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And as you already know from my previous discussions, we're roughly 150 parts roughly above what is considered safe. But always in this time, the South Pole had somehow retained itself to be free from having the net impacts of carbon dioxide. It all generally affected the North Pole more directly than it did the South Pole. Now, in one of my previous discussions, I mentioned to you why that happened in relation to the deep water trenches that were surrounding and keeping it cool and altering the atmospheric chemistry around it. But for the first time, the carbon parts per million count in the South Pole went over 400 parts per million. Now, of interest to this, it's been only one other time in its history has it ever been over 400 parts per million, but it was 4 million years ago. So 4 million years ago, we were roughly equivalent at the South Pole in parts per million. That was a big, massive catastrophe that caused that to go over 400 parts per million, and then not permanently. Also, more alarming to this is that I mentioned to you the figure of where on average we were growing by 2 parts per million annually. But for the first time in Hawaii, the NOAA, which is the Oceanographic Center, it's an American National Oceanographic Center, but they basically measured that for the first time, parts per million rate, so the rate that we're contributing carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, has climbed to 3.02 parts per million. And this has never happened in the history of the world. In the history of the world, it's never happened. Hasn't happened since they've been recording parts per million, which is 58 years. So in 58 years, it's always remained fairly constant, but all of a sudden there's a massive increase. The problem with this is that even though there are some means of sequestrating it, the effects, the net effects of carbon dioxide proliferation around the globe are almost permanent. It takes ages to take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and therefore the impacts in terms of climate impacts wherever you are going to be there for at least the end of your lifetime, the end of your children's lifetime, and the end of your grandchildren's lifetime, unless something is done about it. So that's an interesting kind of take on it. There is, however, a little spin side to this, which is rather interesting. The spin side to this is that there is a what's called in Canada, they have a massive kind of tree species that lives above the 49-degree latitude. So this, in fact, the species is so large in Canada, it's the spruce tree, but they basically have a population that is roughly the size of Spain in terms of forest. Now, before this, they were measuring what the effects of increased temperature would have on these forests. Now, of interest, what's happened is because the increased temperature causes the snow to melt a bit earlier, it increases the amount or volume of water that's available in the soil, which means that roughly, for the first time ever, these forests get roughly an extra 3 to 4 weeks extra growth time. So it means that you have more trees that are able to grow, which is actually a kind of converse spin on carbon dioxide and the mitigation of carbon dioxide, because these species cover roughly 30%, or they are 30% of all tree species, but they contain in their bodies roughly 20% of all the world's carbon. And they're keeping it already in their bodies. The 49-degree latitude goes all the way across Europe into Russia. So it's a massive piece of forest. But the point being is that for the first time, the net impacts that these trees will actually have appears to be beneficial in terms of having increased heat. So they may actually improve our opportunity to mitigate the effects of carbon dioxide. The disadvantage, however, comes from the fact that because there are more trees growing with less water to draw from, that increased growing period may prove negative for other surrounding species. So that's the first kind of subjective condition. The second subjective condition is that it's on the basis that the climate remains stable, meaning that the temperature in the area remains stable. If the temperature in the area increases further than this and greater latitudes are caused to melt earlier, you're going to have a kind of shake-up of all the events, meaning that there will be more water drawn from the soil, less species surviving, and it could start to unravel. But for the moment, it appears that that is actually going to work. Now, I don't know what's going on in Norway. I don't know. The Norwegian people are, I seem to be talking about Norway quite a lot. And not always in a good thing, because I smash Norway a lot about that whole dolphin kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, generally the news that is coming out of Norway, the news that they had recently in relation to getting rid of fuel and diesel vehicles completely and switching over to electric vehicles. But now Norway has actually done something else, and they voted in Parliament last week that they want to, so they're already on track to meeting their neutral output in terms of carbon dioxide output by 2030. Now that's 20 years ahead of schedule. They were committed after COP to making that schedule by 2050. But they've become so good at it, the whole focus of their country is so focused on it, that they're actually going to meet their schedule 20 years ahead of schedule. So that means, as a country, Norway may become the first country to be completely carbon neutral. Now, there is a little spin side to that, you see, because that's just popular advertising. It's almost, in a way, propaganda advertising, because Norway also happens to be one of the largest energy exporters in the world. They have plenty of oil reserves that they export, these oil reserves. And so even though Norway itself may remain carbon neutral, the byproduct of their exports may not be taken into account in relation to that. So it would be interesting for me to find out whether or not they are referring to reducing their carbon dioxide emissions enough to actually also account for the usage of their main export. But either way, I think we've got to take our hats off to the Norwegian people. They're spending roughly $3.6 billion a year just to achieve this. And they're going to achieve it. Ironically, their environmental minister, he tried to go against it, not for any other reason other than saying, look, we've been given until 2050. Why must we do it 20 years ahead of schedule when it's going to cost us so much money? But the MPs in Norway are absolutely driven and determined to do it. And my hat's off to them, my respect to them, and we need more leadership like that. But I'm going to revert back to this point once I've just covered another horrible little piece of news. And this news is kind of, it's important because many times I've spoken about how climate change has affected various different things. Many times I've discussed about how it affected the lions or it affected different creatures. But we now at the point where for the first time a mammal species has been caused to go extinct as a result of climate change. Now, what is big about this is that it is the first such mammal species recorded to become extinct as a result of climate change. So this species, I'm going to tell you a bit about it, and it doesn't have an easy name. Like, it's not like El Rato or some simple name. It's got like a complex name, and it's something that we need to, I'm going to have to read if you don't mind, so just bear with me. The creature is called Bramble Cay Melomys. Okay. But of interest, it was only found in Bramble Cay, which makes sense, in northern Queensland. And it is a tiny little mouse, basically, that lived on a tiny portion of the Great Barrier Reef. So it was actually an endemic reef species. But the rising tides caused by increased kind of temperature around the globe, caused by extra melt, has caused the high tides to remove its once great. It had 64 hectares of ground that it could run around on and subsistence kind of live off, eat what, I don't even know what they eat. I'm sure they eat used to eat something. But the tides dropped that down to basically where they had 0.64 hectares left in which to range. And that was just enough to wipe out an entire species. So if you think about it, here we had a species that has survived countless extinctions. It survived asteroid impacts. Its whole chain, its whole branch, its whole genus has managed to get it through to this point of where, okay, it wasn't abundant, but it occupied a niche inside of the world. and it flourished in that niche. It was first identified in 1856, and it, you know, it was a living species that now will never ever see the light of day again. Now, it's not the first extinction that has happened in our time. We had the yellow sea dolphin, which became extinct due to the amount of toxic junk that has been poured into the rivers around China. But it is an extinction, nevertheless, that is directly attributable to climate change. And so, as a result, I think it's something worth paying attention to. The biologists that were researching this matter said they believe it's just the tip of the iceberg. They believe that there is a lot more mammals and other animals that have been directly impacted by climate change that will never see the light of day. You and I will never hear about it, but it's happening. It's happening. People are changing, things are shifting, the world is changing around us. Now, I'm going to do 3 quick things because I don't like to keep you too long. You know, generally on the internet, you know, people have a kind of 5-minute lifespan in terms of watching something. So I'm going to give you 3 stories I'm going to cover this week. The first story is in relation to the damming of one of China's last rivers. Every single river in China is dammed, the Yangtze, all of the big rivers have been dammed. There is one last refuge that has been running obviously since China's been about, but now China is looking at putting hydropower on that river, and obviously it's to meet their own kind of climate objectives. They're the largest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world, and they have undertaken amongst themselves to correct that. But that's a big story and it's unfolding soon. The second thing is that in Germany, the German government basically has put forward a motion. Now, it's important that I say put forward a motion and not say they've decided, but they've put forward a motion that by 2050 they're not going to have any more any more diesel vehicles or any more petrol-driven vehicles. So you can see around the world economies are shifting, countries are shifting. There is huge emphasis that has been pouring into the kind of changing of the world to make us more efficient. But the thing that is both remarkable, both in Norway and Germany, and also in Israel, they're also kind of playing a role, is that it takes the people to talk about it. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We are talking about it, we're bringing it to you, you're talking about it, and as a result, we're going to start to shift everybody down the same line. As usual, I'd like to say, I would like to hear from you. If you've got any stories or anything of interest that is happening in your area, we'd like to see it, we'd like to screen it, we'd like to put it on our 24-hour news channel, and more importantly, we'd like to hear from you. So, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for watching. It's going to be a freezing cold day today, but we'll make it. I'll see you at the end of the week. Thanks. Hello and welcome to the Mother Channel, and welcome to the Environmental News Network. My name is Jason Saul, and we are reporting once again from the beautiful, scrumptious Monkey Valley Resort in Cape Town. Over my shoulder you have the lovely, long 8-kilometer unspoiled stretch of Nuruk Beach, and the sun is shining, hallelujah. Today I have some very important stuff for you, and this is really important. This is more important than anything else, because today I'm going to tell you how merely by being a couch potato you are going to save the world. It's going to take 2 things for you to do. And I actually had to toss up to myself on exactly what I'm going to call this episode. Well, not that I have much say over it, but I was either going to call it Waking Up the Sleepers, or I was going to call it How to Save the World by Being a Couch Potato. But I'm going to cover 6 stories quickly. I'm going to kind of go a little fast through them, but I'm going to prove to you at the end of this kind of episode exactly how being a couch potato is going to change the world. So our first story is based around China. Now, as you know, recently China has taken a lot of paddy whacking simply because they went ahead with that stupid Let's Eat the Dog festival. Now, as a person who loves dogs, you know, I think it's disgusting. I really don't understand it. They even post pictures up of them like kind of preparing the dogs, you know, and it really injures me deeply to have to watch images like this. And I understand it's like not my culture, it's their culture and everyone's culture, but I don't like it. But what China has done, or fairly recently has done, is they've decided to halve the amount of meat consumed in China. So their objectives is basically to lower carbon emissions as a result of reducing the amount of intake that the public eats. Now, the government has issued a guideline on how much meat people should be eating in China. Now, I find that a little strange. I think it's a little weird that the government issues a mandate on how much meat people eat. I think it's great